Joined by John Byrne at Manchester Metropolitan University. So hello and welcome, John.
Hi, Trudy. Great to be with you.
Thank you very much. It's just such a pleasure. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because at Strengths Profile, perhaps sort of 6 or 7 years ago, the educator sector of our market perhaps was just sort of 5% or so, and now we just see these students coming through from schools, universities, colleges, anyone working in careers, really helping young people starting out in their careers with their strengths. So we're really looking forward to everything that you've got to share today in our chat. But John, before we get on to the strengths piece, tell us a little bit about you, how you got to be at MMU, and how you got into the strengths journey as well here with us.
So I've been at MMU for several years in a couple of different faculties. I joined the business school about 7 years ago, and at that stage I was heavily involved with degree apprenticeships, which is what I was doing immediately prior to taking the full-time undergraduate course, the business management course in 2020. So that, as I think I'll try and demonstrate, has kind of informed some of my thinking about what we can, the relationship between knowledge, skills and behaviors, which is quite explicit on a degree apprenticeship. And going to a full-time undergraduate course, really part of my thinking was how can I bring some of that approach to a standard undergrad course, which is kind of where I meet strengths at that point.
So John, you're focused in the business school, aren't you? So tell us a bit around kind of, the business school's sort of take up so far and where you are with strengths.
So two of the biggest departments in the business school are accounting and finance and banking, and my own department, which is strategy, enterprise and sustainability. On my program, which is a business management program, I have about 1,700 students, and accounting and finance have roughly 1,500. And thus far, I think we have around 2,500 students who are engaging with strengths, and we introduced it a couple of years ago, so it's gone through first year and second year and so on. And now of the other departments, all but one are engaging with strengths, both in terms of student profiles, but also in terms of accreditations for their personal tutors. So the tutors are accredited to coach their students on their strengths.
Fabulous. John, we're going to come on to all those points, but I've kind of bypassed your strengths. So just as we were in the little warm-up session between us, we were chatting about, I didn't warn you about that bit, did I? We were chatting about strengths and our own strengths, and we'd love to hear a little bit more around kind of what strengths you're bringing to the projects at MMU.
So one of my top strengths is courage. And it has a particular meaning, I think, courage. I like new challenges and new adventures, even if I don't quite know how they're going to turn out. And that was certainly the case with degree apprenticeships. And it was most definitely the case with strengths, because strength was something I entered into knowing that there was something there of great interest, but without really knowing at the time quite how much it would change and influence everything we do. One of the strengths that I sometimes find a bit challenging as well is personal responsibility, which we were just talking about. Sometimes I take a bit too much personal responsibility for things, but that really is, the courage really is a strength that sees me involved in these kind of projects, I think.
Yeah, because I guess you've taken on the sort of the champion of the strengths profile within the business school, which is a huge task considering the commitment that you've made to the strengths work with the students as well, isn't it? And I guess those coaches on our call here are thinking, how interesting. I really want to have a conversation with them about the courage and personal responsibility combined mix of strengths dynamics, but we might need to save that for another day. But it's great. I mean, courage is one of our, I guess, more popular weaknesses, and so having you lead this way and role model the strengths approach to other departments has been really fabulous for certainly the students we're seeing at ManMet. So a little bit more around the journey, because you call them level 4s, 5s and 6, is that right, John, at MMU?
That's correct. Yeah. Yes. So first years, second years and third years of undergrad. And we're starting to use strengths now a little bit at postgrad. But the journey for me, at least, started in August of 2020. Not a very memorable year, I'm sure you'll agree. We were in the middle of reshaping our programs for social distance delivery, for blended delivery. All of our timetables were changing, and we were having to plan for, the possibility of further lockdowns. And at the same time, we were launching a new version of the business management program, and I'd just taken over the program. So a meeting was put in the diary with me with Capfinity, and I'll be absolutely honest, at that stage I was thinking, do I need another thing coming on board at this stage, because we had quite a lot on our plates. But it soon became very clear that this was something that was very interesting to me, and we were quite lucky in the respect that our professional development unit that we were looking at targeting for, to implement strengths wasn't till semester 2 or term 2. And so we had some space to actually implement and think about what it could look like. And very quickly we started to see the broader benefits of taking a strengths-based approach, even before we started to work with students. So I mentioned, for example, the training of personal tutors. One of the weaknesses in personal tutoring in universities is this sense of are university academics the right people to coach students? Well, it helps if they have some sort of coaching accreditation, and it helps if they have a focus, which can be strengths. So we then thought about how we use strengths in a classroom, because unfortunately, one-to-one coaching is not a luxury that we can necessarily afford too often in terms of the large numbers of students we have. So we had to rethink a little bit what strengths in the classroom looks like. So we launched, unfortunately, it never was in the classroom that year, it was online. So it did restrict what we were allowed to do. But coming back into face-to-face teaching in 2021, we also then used strengths and Capfinity to design an assessment center experience, which all of our second year students would go through, and that's a strength-based assessment center. And I started to notice a change in the students in terms of their self-knowledge and self-awareness. At that stage, I started to think that the strengths had really made something of a difference. But I think it was really this year, when I took the first years in the classroom, who were face-to-face, that I really understood from a personal perspective quite how much of a game changer strengths has been. The first thing that it does for our students, I should say, it does for them something they don't like doing. An 18-year-old doesn't particularly like talking about themselves and their development. Sometimes we've used other tools, and they say, I don't want to do this. What strengths does? It does the work for them, and it's like a mirror. So immediately they don't have to think, well, what do they want me to say about myself? It's just, here's me. And that's tremendous in terms of building their confidence as well. And this term confidence, I actually don't like the term confidence, because it implies, a certain type of character. And people say our students are or aren't confident. Confident about what?
Yeah.
I have 2 students who sit together very quiet. They're confident listeners. They're confident that that's their strength. They see those things that they, in some cases, maybe thought were holding them back, and actually are coming through in their strength profile. Particularly students who've had a degree of adversity or difficulty. I see a lot of resilience, persistence, those kind of things, because these are cohorts who did their high school, college through COVID.
Yeah.
So those things come through, and so it really builds up a strong sense of self.
So self-awareness, perhaps, rather than confidence, or confidence in their self-awareness.
Confidence in their self-awareness, confidence in particular strengths, not being confident, but confidence in who they are, and an ability to articulate that in a way which they frankly wouldn't have had before. I always do this little game with them, and I tell them to stand up. Everyone stands up, and I say, sit down if you wouldn't describe yourself as hardworking on a CV, and no one sits down. And sit down if you wouldn't describe yourself as all those other terms that everyone uses, motivated. Yeah, exactly. And no one one or two people sit down. But essentially, what our students are able to do is actually articulate an authentic version of themselves. So when they're asked, name 3 characteristics of yourself, about yourself. One of my students went to an interview and she said, I got asked the question that I hate, which is name 3 things that are great about you. And I said, why didn't you tell me your top 3 strengths? She said, I did. I said, what happened? She said, I got the job. because everyone else would have said confident, hardworking, motivated, or any combination of those. But she actually genuinely articulated, what does make her great.
Yeah, and of course, when you're talking about your strengths, as we all know, it's hard to fake, isn't it? She would have, her eyes would have, you could almost be imagining her with her eyes lit up, having a smile on her face, talking about those 3 characteristics rather than, hardworking, good with people.
Yeah. And then the next thing it does, and this I think is really profound, it teaches our students what professional development means. Now, we might all think to ourselves, well, we use that term, of course they know what it means, but the idea that by doing certain things, there's a movement in your development, there's a movement in yourself, is perfectly illustrated by the top 2 boxes in particular, the strengths and the unrealized strengths. And this sense that if I do certain things, I could actually move some of these unrealized strengths into a realized strength is a practical application, if you like, of professional development, the relationship between doing things and developing. And that's a massive piece of the jigsaw in terms of my thinking that's helped me to bring in some of those principles that I mentioned around degree apprenticeships. It's not just what you learn on a course, your knowledge, it's also what you develop through doing things, through the skills and behaviors. And it helps us also to bring those, what we used to call extracurricular, as if they're somehow over here and not core, bring them home to the actual course itself, that they link through the strengths profile. If you do some of these things, this will develop your profile. And I think I've noticed a huge change in students in terms of their uptake of those extracurricular, those internships, those placement opportunities, even the very short ones. They're very keen to align those with their unrealized strengths. So it's not just arbitrary. They actually think, which unrealized strengths do I want to focus on? What activity do I need to do?
Yeah. And John, what's the sort of buy-in from the students? As you said, I mean, I've got teenagers. It's pretty hard, isn't it? Here's a blank sheet of paper, and talk about yourself, or what's their buy-in in the strengths approach in those workshops that you're running with them?
So the first thing to say is exactly to reiterate that point. They don't like the blank sheet of paper approach, and if you say write down things about that just they won't attend again if we keep making them do that. Then you get what's this that you want me to do? Okay, how do I log? Okay, I'll do it. Okay, and they get it halfway through, and you can see that what's another one of these things, and then you get the profile, and that's when you see their expressions change. And sometimes it's a big smile, and I've had this is just amazing, it makes me feel great. Sometimes it's what's that mean? Sometimes it takes a bit of coaching. But one of my first years this year assumed that all universities are using strengths. He assumed this was just common practice, because why wouldn't you? And you've only been using it for 2 years. This is only the second year you've done it. Yeah. He thought this was just everyone was doing it because it had such a great impact on him, and was surprised at others. It really does. Once you get through that profile, it really does build that sense of self, And you can, as a tutor, you get to know your students much better, because you can ask, as you know, as a coach, really, really good questions, which help you to really understand who your students are as well.
Yeah. John, I went on that journey early, the 2 years with your tutors when it was quite new, because obviously you were instrumental in bringing it into tutors, and to my knowledge, there are no other universities bringing it in at that level. And there was reticent, I recall, I hope you don't mind me sharing, with the tutors initially. I sort of, not a reticent, more kind of an unease. This isn't necessarily part of my maybe role profile. You know, what is this psychometric you're asking to teach me about? And I'm not a coach. And I think they were more worried and wanted to get it right. But there was definitely some sort of anxiety around using it with the tutors. You know, they were going on a journey of courage themselves. And I hopped on a call with a big group of them, and you know, to help them through some of these worries. And then I caught up with them a few weeks later, and please feel free to add, but you know, it was so nice to see them at the beginning of this journey with, what is it, what are you making us learn? And then actually this has been profound in terms of the relationships I've been able to build with my students.
Yeah, entirely. And in many respects, that's a reflection of my own journey. You know, it is this, well, what is this? And then you do it, and you start to see it when you take your own profile, and then you start to see the impact with students, and how much it can change their own attitude towards themselves, and how much it can enrich those conversations with students as well. Most of our staff are in one form or another personal tutors, but previously they didn't really have a point of reference. I think personal tutoring in nearly every university seems to be a thing that's under constant review.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I need to review my personal tutoring anymore, because I have an approach. It's, as well as supporting students and hopefully keeping an eye on their attendance, it's developing their strengths and supporting that professional development through strengths. And we do
Yeah.
that right throughout the course. So you asked earlier about the trajectory. I probably got lost a little bit in one of the answers. In the first year, we would identify strengths, and it's really getting students to internalize their strengths, so that it almost becomes second nature for them to think about them. And then we ask them to look for opportunities to develop their unrealized strengths. So that would be what we call a 5-year plan they put together. They talk about their unrealized strengths, and then they look for opportunities, summer internships, those kind of things. In the second year, we get them to deploy their strengths through an application process culminating in a strength-based assessment center. So essentially putting them to work in a applying for a professional role. And then in the final year, on our course, we have what we call professional practice units, where essentially they're units like consulting that are a reflection of kind of real world. They work with business and so on.
Yeah.
And as part of that process, they, with their personal tutors, who are with them throughout this journey, by the way, they'll have a strengths-based PDR session as part of that professional practice. So it's embedded right across the piece, and the point of the last piece is really to help them understand that this goes on now beyond the course and beyond into your professional life.
Yeah, and I guess it supports, certainly the work that I've done with students. As soon as you showcase, these are the logos out there, or the organisations that are doing strengths-based recruitment, they sort of sit up a bit, don't they, in terms of this isn't, I need to get this self-awareness stuff right. It's not just a luxury. Personal development's important. Have you found that?
Yeah, we're yet to see them go into the full graduate cycle with the cohorts that we started with, but certainly in terms of the placement applications that have been going on, I think they, how they align their strengths with any employer actually has been quite interesting, because it makes them look at a job from a or a role from a slightly different perspective, in terms of they do a bit of strength matching essentially.
Yeah.
Whereas previously, I think they would either talk about themselves entirely, or talk entirely about the organization. I think what they do now is they really bring together their strengths with this, with either the role or the organization more broadly, and try and match those two things, which is something we do a lot with them in class. We get them to think about strengths matching, for example.
Yeah. Now, John, if we can pull apart each of those, certainly the first two stages a little bit. So in your level 4s, your first year students, will they have a series of workshops to look at their strengths profile? And what sort of format does that take? I'm thinking there are many educators out there that might be listening that maybe are thinking about strengths, so maybe you're after some top tips around landing this with students.
So yeah, so they have a series of workshops. Previously, we were restricted because we were doing this sort of block teaching for obviously with the pandemic. So we only had 6 weeks with them, unfortunately. So we had to do a lot in those 6 weeks to make sure we'd really embedded it. So once they've done the profile, it then involves a series of questions and the usual kind of coaching approach. But we try to find different ways of doing that. So sometimes we get them to coach each other. So we have a bit of fun and bring together students who don't usually work together. So we might use some raffle tickets and say, okay, whoever's got the same number, you sit together. You need to explain what your top strengths are. And then your friend over here, or your new friend, needs to find opportunities for you to develop your unrealized strengths. So that way they share their strengths profile. We get them to, this is in the context of professional development units, so we get them to rewrite their professional profile, but again, using strengths language, and through doing that, understanding how realized strengths connect to their lived experience. That takes a bit of work, actually, because it takes time for them to really get that right and get that sounding, sounding as good as they can make it. So we spend quite a bit of time on that, about getting them to articulate their strengths essentially, and then they can cross fertilize that with their CV, their LinkedIn profile, and so on.
Yeah.
And then we
It's
start
becoming a language, isn't it, for them? I guess once they get that bit right, they can embed it in all those different areas. So that, is the right approach to get that, confident or self-awareness, confidence around being able to talk about themselves in a way that feels really authentic, isn't it? That feels natural to them.
Yes, yeah, and that makes an enormous difference, and it makes them, it makes them much happier with themselves and with their achievements. And some of those coaching conversations are really interesting. I think one thing to mention is, if a first year student, a university student, probably will have a very different, or in my view, has a very different strengths profile than most professionals would have with a reasonable amount of experience. What we tend to see in first years, and it's a generalization, and there are exceptions, which I'll kind of mention in a second, because it's interesting that there are exceptions, but we tend to see strengths around everyday, that are built up through everyday activity, everyday experience, things like communication. I mentioned listener earlier, rapport builder. One we see a lot is unconditionality. We see that that's probably my most common strength amongst my students, and one of the things I've noticed in classrooms is, if one student has unconditionality as a realized strength, it's very, very likely the people they sit with do as well, because they all have a shared value there about the types of people that they want to interact with, and no judgment and all that other.
It's a very generous strength,
yes,
isn't it?
yes.
You exude unconditionality, I think, don't you? It's like a perfume. Yeah.
And so then, in terms of their unrealized strengths, they tend to be the things that are built through professional experience, let's say, or experience. So things like innovation, catalyst, strategic thinking. And so that gives us a real pot of gold to orientate the students towards activities that will develop those. So it really is that development journey that I mentioned earlier. And then, in terms of going back to realized strength, sometimes students will have one that's quite rare for a first year student, let's say. So you can immediately say, oh, you have a lot of responsibility in your life, don't you? Because that's sticking out there. And it
Yeah,
might be that they're actually in what is effectively a professional role already, but they don't really talk about it. So I've got a few students that, they're in commercial sales roles, or they're HR or things like that. Or it might be something that's going on behind the scenes. I had a student who had service as a realized strength, which I didn't see that often. Don't see that often with the student. I said, is this something you're doing in work? She said, I don't work. Is it something, are you volunteering? She said, I don't really get a lot of opportunity because I'm a carer for my father. He said, there it is. There it is, service.
yeah, yeah,
And so the thing that she might have thought was holding her back in some respects in terms of her professional life was actually shaping, a big part of her professional
yeah.
profile.
I love that, John. So I think certainly my experience is that, they've taken themselves for granted, or the natural gifts that they've got for granted. It's really difficult to take being funny into a CV, and it takes a bit of practice. But
Yeah.
humour's one of mine. I'm very personal about this one. I think it's a brilliant strength to have. I don't know where I'd be without it. But there's a place for it. There's a place for all strengths to be something that are really attractive for their own self-development, their own professional development, but also for organizations down the line as well. John, a quick bit on if I can, on the level 5, the assessment centre piece, which is a bit unique to you. I know time is getting short. I don't know where the time has gone, because that's something quite unique to you. I went on one of the programs or the workshops just before they go on the assessment centre, which gets them prepared for the assessment centre. I was at MMU and I watched a brilliant workshop with one of your tutors, getting them, and it was so great for them to be able to. They were doing the narrative at this point, and getting them ready. But then they also get a bit of an experience by you guys, don't they, to experience an assessment centre?
They do, and I think this is in a sense the centerpiece of my course, happening almost in the middle of our second year. We originally, it was designed to be online, but we've adapted it to be face to face, and the reason for that is that several years ago employers said to me, you need to take them out of the comfort zone of the business school. I thought it's easy for a small course to do that, but it's very hard for a big course like mine. But the assessment centre, we take them to a venue they're unfamiliar with, it's a situation they're unfamiliar with, but they have the tools to cope, and they have the tools to build new relationships. They have the tools to have conversations with their new teammates, for example. I don't want to say too much about it because I'm running it again with the second years this year, and I don't want to give everything away. But they have the tools to have those initial conversations. As how will we approach it? What are your strengths to talk about those things and approach the task from a strengths-based perspective, and they have the tools to understand their behavior through the assessment center. So when they write their reflections about the experience, they frame them according to their strengths. So the bits that they found easier, or the bits they found more comfortable, they link to their strengths. Where there are areas perhaps that they found more challenging, they might link them to their weaknesses or learned behaviors. So again, it's not simply assessing the strengths, it's also giving them that self-awareness to understand, in a sense, and interpret that experience.
Yeah. And John, can the students recognize when they're talking about a strength? We, as coaches, we do strength spotting, don't we? We kind of, can students do that in themselves? Can they kind of see when they're coming alive and talking about strengths? Obviously, that's what the employers are looking for down the line for your students, aren't they?
I think that's what's starting to come through. Yeah, I think there's this internalization in the first year, but I think with the second years, that's what you start to see. You start to see that strength spotting, that understand they're using certain strengths in certain situations. That certainly comes through in their reflections on their activities.
Yeah, great. And I know one thing I was kind of I just thought was really powerful in the session that I ran, that I watched you guys run, was helping them to see actually how their strengths can help them deliver a wide range of things. Let's say it's problem solving, and actually let's remove, the resolver strength, but how many of their other strengths can help them utilize and overcome certain challenges, or maybe even if you think, they're looking for different strengths, how your other strengths can help you support that. You took them on this really powerful journey that actually everything that they've got in their resource can be really utilized for them going forward.
Yeah, and that's a really, really important part of strengths, that it's not fixed. It can be adapted, it can be matched, they can seek support from their strengths, in a sense, to meet the requirements of the task that they're in, and they can understand as well. And I think this is a good point to to make in today's higher education environment in particular. They can understand the things that don't energize them, that might actually cause them some stress and some difficulty. And I think that's actually very important for their well-being as well, because as well as identifying all that's positive, they can see where situations might have a negative effect on that well-being, and prepare for that. And I think um, that's also one of the important things that we're starting to implement now. This is, in a sense, we've done the positive piece, and now, not negative, but we're looking at other ways that it can help shape them. So I mentioned our 5-year planning earlier, and we're going to ask students to think about a well-being action that might address something that's in either a weakness or a learned behavior that might cause them an added amount of stress. So I think that's a really important piece as well for the environment we work in today.
Particularly, well, certainly, I've seen it in my own children as well. The learned behaviours have been a real wake-up call for students, because, say, like, and I see the similar sorts of ones in the writer detail, the things that they've had to do at school, and they've done it well, and they've, had all these pats on the backs over the years, and they've done it well, and suddenly you kind of say, these aren't your strengths, and it's this moment, well, of actually taking sort of adulthood and taking ownership now of actually what's been energizing them and what hasn't. And schools generally don't talk about, what you love to do and what you're full of energy doing. It's like what you can do, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a hugely important insight, I think, that students would acknowledge. I had a student yesterday acknowledging he just doesn't enjoy change, even though he's a catalyst for others. He doesn't enjoy change situations, and he thinking about change can often mean stress levels are raised or whatever. So actually knowing that, so that level of self-awareness, I think, is another dimension.
Brilliant. John, thank you so much for your time. What I'm going to ask you to do, if I may, is to sort of sum up, really, for those maybe new to strengths or strengths-based approaches with their students, maybe sort of your top 3 takeaways of how it's impacted your students and why you use it.
I suppose the top takeaway is strengths isn't just a tool that you use over here. It's a whole approach to the development of people and the development of your students. It strengthens every aspect of that, whether it's personal tutoring, whether it's your professional development provision, whether it's this term, the confidence in your students, whether it's the students' abilities or the students' willingness to involve themselves in extracurricular activities. It really does positively influence all of those areas in a way that my colleague Tracy and I, who've implemented it in our department in particular, could never have foreseen at the beginning of the journey quite how much it just underpins everything. And it's when we implemented it, we didn't have to change everything else or shove something aside to bring in strengths. It actually supported everything else we were doing. And having that insight, and that it changes people. So it's not so much the top 3. It's the fact that so much is influenced in a positive way by strength, and it can underpin so much of what we're doing in terms of developing our students, and really move us from a position where I think traditionally universities have been, where they say, right, we deliver knowledge, but also we do a little bit of whatever you call it, attributes, or those kind of skills and behavior stuff, and we
Mhm.
hide them away in unit specifications. So yes, they'll learn about, I don't know, responsible enterprise, but because they're doing a presentation, they'll get more confident and they'll develop their digital skills or whatever. No, now it's very explicit conversations about not skills but strengths, and putting that at the heart of that development. So it feels like a much more rounded program from a business perspective than it did previously. And as I say, it feels that what Strengths has done for me is move the program to have something of a feel of degree apprenticeships, where students are constantly being asked to reflect on their development and what they do in the workplace. And it's a tool that's actually brought some of that into a full-time undergraduate program, which is truly remarkable.
Brilliant. John, we are out of time. I know that you and I could talk about this for probably at least the rest of the hour, but a heartfelt thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and expertise and passion on strengths. And I know that I speak for everyone who's watching. Thank you so much for the time that you've dedicated, and well done for all the amazing work you've done at MMU.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.